I am being watched. Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest Season 2 Episode 13. It's called Dead Reckoning. Also, I'm realizing that I'm already halfway through Season 2. I don't know when that happened. I feel like the first half of this season's kind of just... I've almost been in like a trance and all of a sudden we're already halfway through. Feels like we just finished Season 1. But we have big stuff happening this episode because this is kind of capping off the Stanton stuff. It didn't necessarily feel like it was definitely the end of that until the very final part of the episode in which she is most definitely dead. I mean, arguably we didn't see a body, but I'm feeling pretty good about this being the end of Stanton and the end of Snow. And we've got so much other stuff going on that it feels like a good time to kind of wrap this stuff up. Actually, one of my favourite moments of the whole episode is that final moment where you realise that she's about to die, when you realise that Snow has not ran away, he's actually just went into her car wearing his suicide vest that is about to detonate, and she tries to turn it off at the last second, but clearly it does not work. I really like that. It's not really a redemption for Snow in any way. You know, it doesn't make you like him anymore, and it doesn't feel like he's doing it for any good, noble reasons, but it does feel like she earns the comeuppance that he is getting the revenge for, and I think that's satisfying as a moment, and also wraps things up. So, yeah, I mean, this episode is very much about her controlling Reese and Snow, because now Reese is also wearing a suicide vest. She's done that to him after she's knocked him out, after getting him from Donnelly, the end of the last episode. And this episode is about her controlling them and making them do various things. And as we go through, we start to kind of maybe get little hints or just little details of what these actions are and maybe what they're about and maybe how it ties into a new entity or a new villain or I don't even know. I mean, I'll let's try and break it down and sort of go through what we learn in this episode. Although I will start with a small critique. This is a very good episode, but I'm going to start with a critique, which is that for the second episode in a row, it repeated a lot of the same footage that we already had repeated last episode, which was, again, a repeat of stuff we got in Season 1. I think it's especially egregious in this episode because they just showed it last episode, so it felt really weird to get it again. But that was the stuff where Reese is told that he's going to take out Stanton, and Stanton's told that she's to take out Reese. There was like a couple of lines that were new, I think specifically when Snow was talking to Stanton. But this little segment where they've been given this mission and Reese is told to take her out after the mission's complete, like, we've seen this now numerous times. And I get maybe showing it once more while it's relevant somewhere around this part of the season. The fact that we got it last episode and this episode meant when we cut to it, I'm like, okay, you better be about to show me a really new side of this, because it feels like we're showing the same 30 seconds for the fourth time in the show or something like that. And yeah, nothing really meaningful did get shown here. Obviously, after the explosion, after they try to kill each other and the drone strike comes in, then we cut to her waking up in the hospital, and that stuff's fine. Like, obviously, once we pick up there, it's new stuff. It's filling in some new story, introducing this new player to the story. But you could have just started with a drone strike. You could have just started with, like, them running from the explosion, the drone strike, and then you see her, waking up in the hospital. Like, you could have just started there. So I don't know why they didn't do that. It felt like they were adamant about showing these moments again. Maybe they were worried that people were watching this episode without having seen previous episodes. Well, to be honest, I don't think it would be enough to invest a new audience member into getting into all this stuff by just showing that one little snippet again. But regardless, I wanted to get that out of the way because it really felt weird when they started showing it again, because we just got it last episode. However, they show this stuff, and we're introduced to this English guy. He looks like some sort of agent or some sort of politician or something. He works for some kind of mysterious agency. We don't actually know who. She makes a guess at one point, and he says, "Nope, that's not who I work for." So we don't actually know. But he's basically trying to recruit Stan in this period in 2010 after the missile strike. And ultimately convinces her to work for him in exchange for basically who's responsible for the mission they were on that Stanton and Reese were both to be killed on. Obviously, they both ended up surviving, but why that mission existed. Obviously, Snow gave the order, right? And she clearly wants revenge against Snow, and that's something we've been seeing throughout this past half season or so, and still into this episode. But he's promising the person who's the really responsible. And when he said that, I was thinking, okay, someone up the food chain who's giving these orders, the one that's actually making these decisions. Although, by the end of the episode, when we see the name of the person who sold the laptop, because this all comes back to they were there on that mission to destroy a laptop that had been sold from someone high up in the US to the Chinese, I don't know if it was the Chinese government or just someone in China. And at the time, of course, you know, I was doing a lot of theorizing about, oh, this has to be something to do with the machine. This is something to do with all that stuff. That's why it's so super top priority. That's why it's all this espionage. It's why they're to kill each other afterwards, because no one can know it exists. So it's all just layers upon layers of contingency and all that stuff. So, okay, that gives her motivation. And it turns out everything she's doing right now is for this English guy. I don't know if we get a name for him in this. I mean, I'm sure he's got a name here. John Greer is the name in IMDb. I don't think he says that in the episode, though. I think, not that I feel like I've spoiled anything by reading that. I don't think that's going to matter. It's just a name. But he is the one wanting this to be done. He wants what turns out to be, as best I can tell, there was a lot of interesting new details in this one, but Stanton makes the boys, being Reese and Snow, go after this fancy drive, this hard drive that's got stuff on it. We don't know at the time exactly what, but they're to pick it up off of some shady people. That turns into a little bit of a scene where they want more money, and Stanton shoots them through the window. I can talk about some of those details in a bit, but then they're to break in to this secret floor on this building, which, as it turns out, is this ultra experimental, I guess we'll call it electronic warfare center. It's basically where they make viruses and malware that are military level, that are designed to take down systems of entire countries, of security agencies, and things like that. And it's like, okay, interesting. And we think she's there to steal something. And when I say we, I mean the characters think that. You know, Finch thinks that, Reese thinks that. So inherently we kind of think that as well if we're going along with them. But it turns out that she's actually there to slot the drive in they brought and infect their system with something. And we don't know exactly what or why. It does raise the stakes, because when Finch realizes the sort of thing that this place does, that can shut down entire like countries or even the internet itself, is that it could actually end up destroying the machine. So there's actually kind of stakes, not just for the world, but for the premise of the show itself. So it actually still, it felt like a lot of high stakes. By the time it got to like when everyone was communicating, I really enjoyed the idea that once they were in this top floor, this place is designed so that no signals can come in or out, because everything has to be like, you know, not only is everything top secret, but it's all viruses and computer stuff. So they basically block any incoming or outgoing signal, whether it be wired, wireless, or whatever. Obviously, there's a hardwired telephone that can be used, and that's how Reese calls Finch here. But nothing from the mobile phones, no form of internet going out, that kind of thing. And I like that because it basically meant that Reese could start planning to do something against Stanton, because Stanton had earpieces on them and could hear everything they were saying. And he's like, hey, Snow, she can't hear us anymore because we're in here. We need to start coming up with a plan. And Snow is just, you know, he doesn't want to go against the plan. He wants to do what he's told to stay alive. He's a bit of a weasel, it seems, as we've seen throughout this season. So, and I'm not saying that like most people wouldn't want to follow the rules and stay alive as well. I'm not saying that, but compared to Reese, I'm saying he's a weasel. So like I enjoyed all that. I enjoyed the rules of that and the playing with those mechanics. I think that's a really fun kind of beat, especially since you've got Carter and Fusco looking for them as well and trying to get to this place, and they're having to like try and meet up at the same location. All of that was very enjoyable. But what it all builds up to is that she has used this drive to install something here for the English guy and whoever he represents, whatever that agency or group is. They've installed something that is spreading throughout the system. You know, we get the classic kind of like map, digital map with the red lines going from New York to all these other major cities. Something is in the internet, something's in the system, and we don't know what it is yet. And I actually laughed out loud when Finch said, we don't know, but I can tell when it's going to activate. It's going to activate in about 5 months. And I laughed out loud at that because, that sounds like it's around the time the season finale is going to happen. So I got a good chuckle out of that. Not because they did anything wrong, but just because I'm aware of the time frame of what that represents. And I'm like, oh, about season finale time. That sounds like a great time for that to kick in. So we have this mysterious thing that's going to turn on or do something to the internet in 5 months. For the sake of the show still going, I'm going to assume it doesn't destroy the machine or impede it, at least permanently. But I do wonder if it'll shake things up, whatever it ends up doing. So, yeah, there's some mystery here. All that, world building is good. And I think we'll get back to the emotional side of things, but obviously Stanton, before she gets in the car at the end and meets her demise, she's told by this English guy, John Greer, who sold the laptop in the first place, who sold the laptop to the Chinese. And we don't hear the name at first. It's not until the very end of the episode where it goes back and it shows you her get into the car again and you see the bit of paper she wrote it on kind of fluttering in the flames at the end. And you just get a quick glimpse of it, but you can see it. And the name in the paper reads Harold Finch. And I thought this was a very good reveal for 2 reasons. One, they set it up beautifully when the Greer is talking to her and he says, hey, I've got a name for you, but unfortunately that's all I have. Because as good as we are, we've never been able to actually find any evidence of who this guy is. Like, this name does not exist according to the world. And given how Finch protects his identity and given how Finch keeps himself a secret from everyone, including the very things that he's worked for, that's actually a really big hint that it's going to be Finch, because yeah, he would be secret. They wouldn't know who he is. So I really like that. And then the other thing, of course, is then it begs the question as to, okay, why did he sell that laptop? I was assuming up until that point, until that very final reveal, I was assuming that this was some villain doing something nefarious. But now that it's Finch, I don't think this reveal is telling us that Finch was doing something bad. If anything, if I was to guess right now as to why Finch was selling a laptop that I do think is in some way tied to the machine, whether it's just information about the machine, that seems less likely, though I don't think Finch would just tell them that or give them those kind of secrets. My suspicion here would be that Finch, kind of in a sort of mutually assured destruction kind of way, wanted other powers in the world, in China in this case. He wants them to also be getting numbers to stop tragedies. Like, he doesn't care about just stopping tragedies in the US. This was his attempt maybe at having China also stopping tragedies in their own country. And maybe the idea is that he'd want this to go everywhere and everyone would get relevant numbers for their countries. That would be my guess right now. Obviously, there could be some swerves here. There could be some other reason why Finch wanted to do this. Maybe he was trying to investigate something to do with Ingram. Maybe he was trying to do something else that I have not thought of. But that's my gut instinct, is that he was trying to give more people access to the numbers that are relevant to stop more deaths from happening. But I don't know. I certainly don't think that he intended the mission that happened or could have foreseen a lot of the consequences of what he did. I'm not even sure if he knows that something he did led to what happened to Reese and his old partner. And if he does, it probably just adds into some more of the guilt that he's trying to make up for and why he feels especially kind of devoted to trying and to help Reese and like why he sort of picked him in the first place. If he does happen to know the connection there, I don't know if he does. I think that's something that we could explore later if it does come up. But very interesting. I was super into all this sort of larger mythology stuff that it was kind of playing at. I think anytime we talk about either the machine itself and its, science fiction style, like self-awareness, or what it actually is and how it can operate and how much of an entity or life form it is, or anytime we're talking about the mythology of the machine in the terms of the people in the world who know about it or are trying to find out about it, or how secretive it is and people try to like get to it but are being killed for it, that stuff's also very interesting. So I think that's interesting. I do also think that Stanton's death here, on the one hand, was quite surprising because it felt like they were setting up a new plot thread with her getting this name. I'm also kind of relieved that it gave us that sudden shock ending to her story, because, I was critical in season 1. I thought the flashbacks with Stanton and Reese were some of the weaker parts of the season, and I do think her season 2 stuff's been much better. But I do honestly think that we've got so many other things going on that are more compelling. Between anytime Elias pops up, the stuff with Hirsch and his boss in Washington, Root, of course, being number one here as far as all that stuff goes in terms of like plot threads and villains or anti-heroes or frenemies or however you want to categorize all these various characters. I think Stanton and Snow were probably at the bottom of my list in terms of like excitement. So I think this was a great finale to sort of pay this stuff off. And of course, some of the emotional stuff that came out of this episode made it a fitting conclusion, and I got to really enjoy how it ended. And I think it was the right time probably for that to happen. I think they knew what they were doing here with bigger and better things to go on to. And like I say, I think all the stuff in this episode where Snow's critiquing Reese for being too nice, basically, for having a conscience and not being willing to just kill people. Reese going out of his way to stop him from hurting civilians, or refusing to answer for Stanton and things like that. Basically not caring if he gets blown up. But she keeps reminding him. There's a great shot early on when he first wakes up, when she points out, you may not care about yourself, but there's civilians around that'll get hurt. And you can just see in the side of the frame, there's like two girls, like sort of, playing or arguing next to their mother. And it's like just a nice little visual of there's innocent people around that he cares about, because he's a hero, right? He's basically a superhero at this point in the show. So you've got the heroics, if you will. But the other emotional stuff to come out of all this plotline, of course, is just a reaffirmation of Finch's caring about Reese, and the others too, and Carter as well. They all care about Reese. They're all trying to save him. And that bubbles up in the finale where Reese tells Finch not to come near him because he's got a bomb strapped to his vest. But of course, despite the fact that Reese is able to talk away Carter and Fusco, Carter wants to try and defuse the bomb, but Fusco and Reese kind of talk her out of it because she's got a son. She's got a lot to lose if this thing goes off and she's nearby. So she's talked down. It's a big emotional moment. I thought the performances in the scene were pretty good. Like, really good stuff. It was nice that Reese thanked both of them. He said thanks, and then there's a little pause, and he says, both of you. I'm like, oh, Fusco's getting some recognition for a change. That was quite nice. But, of course, I think the headline scene, as far as, like, emotionally investing in the characters goes, has got to be the rooftop. It's got to be Reese realizing that Finch has ignored everything he said to come and help him, and the idea that he, like, he's going to be there, he's going to show up, he's going to do whatever he can to save him. He's not just going to let him go it alone. So we get a tense scene where Finch, after a little bit of convincing, Reese finally lets him try and defuse the bomb, and he's like, well, I don't know anything about bomb disposal other than maybe some rudimentary basics, but she's using a phone to trigger it, and I know a lot about hacking into technology. So that's kind of how he goes through it. And there's a little bit of a, 3 attempts, 3 strikes and you're out kind of thing with picking these codes that will reset the phone or unlock it. So it's a good scene. Like, the actual specifics of the, like, whether or not the bomb will go off is not the important part. The important part is the willingness to put his life on the line to help Reese, for them to basically be in this situation where Reese is trying to get rid of Finch to save his life, and Finch is not letting him go it alone, which is a nice counterpoint to earlier on in the season when Finch was kidnapped, and he was like kind of accepting that this is it, and that his contingency was just for Reese to go on alone. I think quite similar here. Reese was ready to let himself go, and that Finch and the others would keep going without him. And Finch is saying, no, like, we're saving you. We're doing this together. So, by the end of this episode, we seemingly have the full team back. We have Reese finally back in play. We might get a more traditional style episode next time because he's back out there. Which, actually, on that subject, is this the first episode of the show where there's not a number? It might be, because even in other episodes, like last week, where the plot focused more on something else, like, you know, Reese being in prison and trying to get him out, the interrogations and all that, there was still a number, like a joke plot with Fusco dealing with a number. This might be the first episode that just flat out does not have a number of any kind. Even the stuff at the start of the season, when we were dealing with the root stuff, or maybe the second episode didn't. Because the first episode did. We had, you know, when Reese got the dog and all that. Maybe episode 2. Well, no, that's not... I mean, technically... technically, I don't know if they get a number in episode 2, but the episode revolves around a number that Reese requested from the machine to help find Finch. I guess that one's a bit of a technicality, and and to be fair, technically it was also before that episode. It wasn't in episode 2 itself. Okay, it might only be the second, but this one sticks out more to me though, because they're not even doing anything to do with a number in this episode. It's purely about other plot that's been set up. So I think that's quite interesting, just from a looking at the show as a whole kind of thing and seeing where it's fallen. Other stuff in the episode to mention would be just in general Carter. Like, she actually wakes up at the crash site. She wasn't kidnapped, of course, so she's actually still in the car that's flipped upside down and has to skedaddle. Finch is like, hey, you've got to go before anyone shows up and asks questions about why you're here. You're lucky no one saw you, kind of thing. And we get her talking to another guy from the FBI who's investigating this. They kind of talk about how Donnelly was kind of obsessed and paranoid about catching this guy in the suit, and it sets up the idea, which is kind of fulfilled at the end of the episode when the agent says they're dropping the case. It sets up this idea that this was like a sort of lone passion project for him. It's not something that the FBI as a whole was determined to deal with, and they're quite happy to accept that Snow was the man in the suit at the end of the episode. So that kind of neatly ties up that side of things as well, the FBI side of things, which again, much like I said about the Stanton and Snow plot, I do think tying up this FBI want to hunt down Reese plot, it feels at the right time. It feels like we're kind of at the edge of where we could go with it, and I think it makes sense to wrap that up now, because again, there's just far more interesting things that they've set up that we're now playing with throughout the rest of the show. So yeah, I think this episode did a lot of good little bows that I wasn't expecting to be all tied off at the same time, but it kind of dealt with a few things and has left us in a place where we've only got more interesting plots to do now. Which is not to, that sounds like I'm almost being down on it, and I'm not. Like, I think this is some of the best stuff that any of these plots have had, particularly Stanton, and how she dealt with Snow and Reese. I think what made it interesting was maybe less Stanton herself and more this idea that you've got Reese and Snow being forced to kind of work together, and you've got Reese trying to be a hero and not hurt people and figure out a way to get out of it, where Snow has just accepted his fate. And I think that's kind of the real character beat at the real piece of analysis at the center of all this story in this episode, is that them two working together shows a nice contrast of someone who is going through redemption and is trying to atone for anything they've done and is a hero, and then someone who just has accepted defeat and doesn't try to fight their way out of it no matter what. Snow is very much the opposite of Reese in this context, and I think that's kind of the point of having them together. And by the end, you know, you've got, like, technically Reese did want to sacrifice himself at the end, but he wanted to do it to save others, whereas like I said earlier, Snow's decision to go and sit behind Stanton is not a noble one. He's doing it for revenge when he realizes he's got not really many other choices. But it's interesting they both are accepting blowing up, but for very different reasons. And I think the comparison between them is very apt in this episode, and kind of gives it that extra, I always talk about how you've got the surface plot, but then there's the extra weight underneath it that is more about the characters as a whole as we're going through the entire journey. And I felt like that's where I was finding that in this episode. So, plus we got to tease some interesting machine connected things, particularly whatever Finch was doing by selling this laptop to the Chinese. I'm sure we'll get some more on this at some point when it's relevant or somehow comes up. Maybe through this new British character who's doing stuff with the computer networks of the world. We'll see what that is. But again, that'll be nicely timed around the season finale. But yeah, that is my thoughts on this episode of Person of Interest. Looking forward to the next one. Let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. Like, subscribe, all the usual stuff. Helps us out a bunch. And of course, you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep the lights on. But that is me, so thank you very much. I will see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?